Hi, I'm Stephen R. Deutsch. I served in the United States Coast Guard from 1957 to 1963. Yeah, I was attending high school. Academics wasn't a priority for me. Sports were of much greater interest, and probably keeping out of trouble with being a teenager in the Bronx with a lot of my friends. And it seemed like a good idea that I think of going into the service as perhaps the possibility of a career or setting some direction for my life. I actually enlisted in the service when I was still in high school. I enlisted to go, I wanted to be in the Air Force. Every teenager in the 50s wanted to fly a jet plane, and that was my desire and my goal. And at 17, I needed my parents' approval to enlist. I went down to the Custom House in New York City. I took the military service entrance exam, and much to my surprise and to my mother's, I did extremely well on the exam. And I think I finished like in the top 2% nationally. And I can remember saying to the recruiter, I said, well, I'm all set for the Air Force. And he said, young man, you did so well you can be in any branch of the service. I said, well, I want to be in the Air Force. And he said, well, you did so well you could even be in the United States Coast Guard. And my mother said, the Coast Guard? And I didn't even know what the Coast Guard was. And I hadn't heard about the Coast Guard growing up in the Bronx. I wanted to be in the Air Force. But it turned out my mother had a crush on somebody who was doing a movie serial on the United States Coast Guard, Don Winslow. I looked him up later on, and guess what? I was enlisted in the United States Coast Guard. At boot camp, I had played sports, so I was in pretty good shape, and I was at a 250, or I guess we came down to 249 to 248. I was number one in going through basic training until it came to the rope climb. And I wasn't excited about climbing a rope because I had slid down the rope in junior high school and burned my hands. So they don't like it in the service when you say no. I didn't climb the rope. I did spend some time in KP though, and all of a sudden I wasn't number one going through basic training. We had guys that didn't know how to swim that had to jump without a bathing suit on from a 25-foot tower into the swimming pool. But again, it was training to prepare us to deal with any emergency or any situation that could pop up, whether it was having to jump from the ship 25 feet of freeboard into the water, or having to be in the water with burning oil, how to make circles and take a breath and go back under. And I can remember, and it was August, being out in Cape May, New Jersey, out on the airstrip and marching, and coming to a halt and parade rests, and seeing 5 or 6 people out of the 240 some odd men that were in our company just keel right over from the 95-degree heat. So yeah, but basic training was an interesting experience. It was tough. I can remember having to fire the 45, and we had to take it apart and put it together blindfolded. And I was really good at that. The only thing, I couldn't hit the target, so I wasn't real good with the 45. However, when it came to the M1, I had no problem. I'm ambidextrous, but I write with my left hand and I throw with my left hand, and I literally, and those of you out there who've ever fired an M1, when that bolt comes back, I qualified left-handed and right-handed both with the M1. And I think I'm the only one that ever went through basic training that did that, and I managed not to take my eye out when that bolt came back. But it was an interesting experience. It was an incredible education. It was very intense. You learned to go out without sleep. You learned from everything from rowing a boat to being able to jump from that 20-foot, 25-foot tower into the water, the basic first aid, and the history of the Coast Guard, which it was exciting. It was tough. It was challenging. I will tell you, they had me on the competitive team, having to row those big rowboats at basic training, and you got some calluses on your hands, but I was probably in the best physical condition in my life when I got out of basic training. First place I was assigned, I was TAD, your temporary active duty, down at St. George, which was where the captain of the port in New York City was. And from there, they put me into port security, and I was sent down to the captain of the port in Philadelphia, which was opposite the Philadelphia Navy base in New Jersey. And we did mostly port security work and a lot of search and rescue stuff, and I ended up being billeted in communications. It was part of my responsibility to deal with the Air Force warning. I had to get a secret clearance, and there were drills and tests that went on all the time. I grew up, there were two cousins, one that I never recall meeting, although my mom sort of says when I was first born I did, but my mother had two cousins. One was killed in the Pacific. I think they were in the Seabees. And I have a good friend here in Charlotte County that was in the Seabees. And the other was in the Army in Europe. And there were two cousins that my mom had that I never met. The one uncle that came back that was pretty close to me, he had, in those days we would call it shell shock. Now it's post-stress. And he had some emotional issues, and he died in a VA hospital when I was a youngster in New York City from I think it was cancer that that he died from. But he definitely was affected by the experience in Europe in the military. Those are the two closest to me. I fought my first fire. There was a fire near the Philadelphia Navy base, and the fire engines couldn't get down to it because of the wetlands. And we were actually, the Coast Guard was the closest one to getting to where the fire was. And we took about 3 or 4 patrol boats and put big pumps on them and went across the Delaware from New Jersey to the Navy base. And the trees weren't that big. They were pine trees, maybe top 7 or 8 feet high. But I remember to this day that 50, 75 feet out on the water, you could feel the heat from the fire as we approached them, and pulling the pumps ashore and the hose and putting the fires out. And we were so into what we were doing. It wasn't until I got back to the base later that night and got cleaned up that I recalled that my hair was all singed up here and my eyebrows were singed, and but it was an intense experience, and frankly it gave me an awful lot of respect for every single one of our firefighters and what they do, and it was exciting, it was challenging, and in retrospect it was maybe even a little bit scary. The intense heat of those evergreens. So I have a lot of sympathy for those people that are fighting the forest fires that we have nowadays. They're really intense. I was a seaman. I probably didn't have the best record in the Coast Guard. There was an occasion where I got busted and demoted. I was in communications, and it was pretty exciting because everything, the whole national air defense system, everything challenged through the communications. And what a lot of folks don't realize, the Coast Guard has responsibility of maintaining the safety of the country, and there is no ship that enters an American port that doesn't have clearance from the United States Coast Guard. And if a ship had come from an Iron Curtain country in those days, or a country that the ship had product on it that was made from one of the communist bloc countries, we had to maintain 24-hour-a-day surveillance on that vessel. And we had armed guard on the dock. Everyone was checked with an instrument called a Mark II, sort of like a Geiger counter, before they got on or off the ship. And we actually had a boat in the water on the water side of that ship, 24/7 surveillance on it, making sure that any contraband and something that shouldn't be coming into the country was coming into it. And as a ship approaches a port, whether it would be New York or whether it would be Philadelphia or any one of the great ports we have here in the United States, they have to call ahead, and the Coast Guard has to give them permission before they can come into the United States port. And it's one of the things that a lot of people weren't aware that the Coast Guard did. And back in that day, we still had the weather stations. We didn't have the satellites we had. And I at one time wanted to get on one of those ships, and they would sit in the North Atlantic. And I can remember watching a Coast Guard cutter come in June, and it was 75 or 80 degrees out, and they had been out on weather patrol for 3 months, breaking ice with bats and hammers, breaking the ice off the bow of the boat in June in Manhattan after they had spent 3 days sailing back from being out on weather patrol. We also not only did that, again, this was before satellite stuff, but the Coast Guard had 2 big ice ships, icebreakers. One was the east wind and one was the west wind. And when I was getting out of the Coast Guard, I wanted to take that because the west wind was considered the best Liberty ship in the United States Coast Guard. And that would leave from the East Coast, go down the East Coast, go into the Caribbean, have a couple stops in South America on the way down, go in Antarctica for maybe 6 weeks or 2 months, and then come back along the coast of Africa and end up in the Mediterranean. It was considered the best Liberty ship in the Coast Guard. And I wanted to extend my active service duty to go on that, and I wanted to extend for a year. And they said you had to extend for 4, and I said, well, I'll go for 2. And they said, no, well, you have to extend for 4 years. So I ended up not going, but that would have been an incredible experience. Would have been a little cold in the Antarctic. But those are things that the Coast Guard routinely does. What a lot of folks aren't aware of is that the United States Coast Guard is the only fully active branch of the service in peacetime, 24/7. And we all know about the search and rescue efforts that the Coast Guard does, and anywhere from Puerto Rico up to Alaska, or from the West Coast to the East Coast. The Coast Guard is there, both in the air and in the water, in terms of the search and rescue efforts we do. Plus, what the Coast Guard does, if there's a body of water that involves or touches more than one state, whether it's a lake in New York State that goes between New York and Pennsylvania, or between New York and Canada on an international waterway like the Great Lakes, the Coast Guard is there. So a lot of those bodies of water, they have the responsibility of providing safety and security as well. And again, that's 24/7. And there were only about 27,000 of us on active duty when I was in the Coast Guard back in the 50s. That's somewhat greater today than it was then, but it's still the smallest branch of the service. Well, I don't know about the Space Force nowadays. I was in the reserves, but I was on active duty for a little over 2 years, from 58 to 60. Well, that's what I'm saying. It was a 2x6 program, 2 years active duty, and then 4 years reserves. Okay. And interesting, at the end, I offered to re-enlist because Vietnam was blooming, and I volunteered to go to Vietnam. And it's sort of kind of interesting in retrospect. They wouldn't take me because I had 2 children, and back in those days, well, that must have been the 60s then. They wouldn't take you with 2 children. Nowadays they will, but they wouldn't. So they said no, they weren't interested. In both World War I and World War II, the Coast Guard had the highest percentage of casualties of any branch of the service. And it's on a percentage basis. One of the things the Coast Guard guys did, every merchant ship had a Coast Guard gun crew on it. And when a merchant ship went down, 5 to 7 coasties were probably killed. The Coast Guards, primarily the ones that handled on D-Day, they handled the landing craft. And if the Germans didn't get them coming into the beach, they got them going on the way back. But the Coast Guard literally had the highest percentage of casualties in both World War I and World War II. So, it's things that people aren't aware of, but, having been educated in part of the service, it. And we take a lot of jokes, particularly from the Navy and the Marines, but we hold our own. Without going into detail, in Captain of the Port, New York, There were security measures to keep the port safe, you know, and again, I had a secret clearance, but there were some concerns. When I was on active duty in New York, there were some situations where the Coast Guard was ramped up to make sure that a visiting submarine from another country didn't decide to come in and go up the East River by the United Nations, or that other questionable activity wasn't taking place at any part of the vast waterfront. And you know, we worked with the customs officials in a number of areas, but the Coast Guard had the main responsibility of securing that port, and we did. And on occasion, there were some interesting situations that developed during the Cold War. There were a couple bad days. I'm not sure what I can talk about a worse day. We had a couple of intense incidents that I can't talk about. I mentioned before that no vessel enters the United States without permission from the United States Coast Guard. There were occasions when vessels made attempts to enter the United States, and perhaps not with great positive motivation. Back in the 50s. We all know about German submarines coming to our coast and in our waterways in the 40s. But certainly this was potentially possible in the 50s as well. You know, you get in a situation like that, you're so revved up because you're dealing with, and I think this happens in combat and this happens in every confrontational situation, the adrenaline pumps up. You know what you're trained to do, you know what you're supposed to do, and you know, and maybe the fur goes up a little bit on your back, but you're thinking of your job, and that your job here is to protect this country and to do whatever you have to do that we can maintain our sovereignty, maintain our freedom, and protect every man and woman in this country. And it's just taken for granted because that's what you're trained to do, and that's what you do. I think it was a good experience for me. I enlisted and I went into the service as a sort of a smart aleck, immature street kid from the Bronx who was probably borderline juvenile delinquent. And when I got my honorable discharge, I was able to leave the service as an immature young adult. You know, it's part of my life that'll always be there. The experience was a valuable one. I think it was good for my character. And the most significant thing was when I first enlisted and I took that oath to defend the Constitution of this great nation. And I think that's what provided the frame of reference for me to become involved in elected office later on, because the oath that I took as a town councilman, state rep, and senator, or you know, before I retired to Charlotte County as a commissioner, you know, that's stuck in my heart and in my brain, and that's sort of kind of why I dedicated my life to community service to whatever degree that I can. I was 4 years old when World War II ended, and if someone in uniform went down the street, I saluted them as a 4 or 5 year old. And I can remember growing up in the Bronx, looking across the street at the apartment house, seeing all these little white flags with a gold star in the windows. I literally could see that dozens of people who had given their lives for this country. I think those of us who raised our right hand and took the oath to defend the Constitution of these great United States of America, you know, that's engraved in my heart. That's part of me. You know, we talked before about the competition between the branches of the service. We're together. You know, every one of us that served in the military, we took that oath to defend this nation, to protect the Constitution of the United States. And that's a bond. That's a bond that we share together. And one of the things that's sort of really neat about Charlotte County, we've got about 27,000 veterans here. And our community is amazing You know, we're Florida's premier veterans-friendly community with the services that we have, not just through the VA, not just through honoring our veterans like at the William R. Gaines Jr. Veterans Memorial Park, the Military Heritage Museum, the replica of the Vietnam Wall, and the dozen or so parks that we have in this county honoring our veterans. And part of our responsibility, part of my responsibility, is to let our young people know freedom isn't free. You know, so many of the kids, to me, it seems, take for granted how blessed we are to be in these great United States of America. They're not aware of the arms, the legs, the lives, the blood that was spilled to keep this country free and let us be the dream of most of the world, that this is where people want to live in freedom. This is where people want to live, where you know, in the type of country we have, where you're able to live your life and to be free and to voice your opinion and to say that you like something and you don't like something. And I think that's a legacy, that's a responsibility that we have to share with our young people. And that's in a way sort of what's behind the William R. Gaines Jr. Veterans Memorial Park. You know, this is going to be an educational experience, along with the museum and along with the Vietnam War. Our young people have to realize and embellish, understand, and appreciate that we're not here today by accident. We're here because of the sacrifice made by many, many in this country, but our veterans, to help preserve the freedom that so many folks just have taken for granted. And that's still a responsibility that I think, to varying degrees, that we all bear.